Okay, so ready to dive into another deep dive.
Absolutely. Fire away.
All right, let's do this. Today we're tackling Awaken the Giant Within.
Oh, yeah, Robbins. A classic.
Right. You know, it's funny. I'd seen this book around for years, but it wasn't until recently I actually picked it up.
What finally made you decide to take the plunge?
Honestly. A friend wouldn't stop raving about it, kept saying it was like a user manual for the brain. And you know what? They weren't exaggerating.
It's true. Robbins has a way of breaking down complex psychological concepts into actionable steps.
Exactly. Like that whole section on decisions, how they're the building blocks of our lives.
Right. He's big on personal responsibility. We are where we are because of the choices we've made.
He even uses that quote, what is it? In your moments of decision, your destiny is shaped. Powerful stuff.
It makes you really stop and think about the decisions you're making every day, both big and small, and how they're shaping your future.
And he doesn't just talk about it in theory. He uses these crazy real-life stories to illustrate his points.
Like, what's one that stood out to you?
Oh, man, there are so many. But that story about Billy Joel, that was intense. Did you know he attempted suicide as a teenager?
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, and then he ended up spending some time in a mental institution. It's kind of hard to believe, considering his success later on.
It really puts things in perspective, doesn't it? Like, we all face setbacks, challenges, even what feel like impossible situations. But it's not the event itself that defines us, it's how we choose to respond.
And that's what Robbins is all about, right? Empowering us to take control of our lives, starting with our decisions.
He argues that even when we feel stuck, we always have the power to choose our response, which then influences the next decision and the next, and so on.
It's like that quote, the only thing that stands between you and your dream is the will to try and the belief that it is actually possible.
Oh, is that another Robbins quote? I like that one.
I think it might be. Or maybe it's some other self-help guru. Either way, it's a good one.
It is. And it ties into another big theme from the book, the power of beliefs.
Oh, yeah, he goes deep on that. How our beliefs can be self-fulfilling prophecies.
If we believe we can achieve something, we're more likely to take the actions that lead to that outcome. And conversely, if we're convinced we're going to fail, well, we'll probably find a way to make that happen too.
It's like Henry Ford said, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right.
It's all about those internal representation, those deeply held beliefs about ourselves and the world around us.
And sometimes those beliefs can be so ingrained, so deeply rooted, that they're almost impossible to shake, even when they're not serving us.
Oh, absolutely. It's like he talks about those beliefs become part of our identity.
He tells this crazy story, right? It's about this woman who's absolutely convinced that someone is trying to poison her with invisible gas.
Oh, yeah, I think I remember that one.
She's like barricading herself in her house, wearing a gas mask everywhere she goes.
And no amount of evidence, no logical explanation could convince her otherwise.
It's a pretty extreme example, but it illustrates how powerful our beliefs can be, how they can literally shape our reality, even when that reality is based on fear or delusion.
And Robbins argues that many of us are walking around with these limiting beliefs, these invisible scripts that are holding us back without us even realizing it.
So, if our beliefs are so powerful, how do we change the ones that aren't serving us? How do we break free from those self-imposed limitations?
Well, he outlines a few different strategies. One is about identifying those limiting beliefs and then actively challenging them.
So questioning their validity.
Exactly. Like, where did this belief come from? Is it based on actual evidence, or is it just something I've always told myself?
Often it's those stories we tell ourselves, those narratives we've created based on past experiences that keep us stuck in these negative patterns.
And once you've identified that limiting belief, he suggests replacing it with a more empowering one.
Okay, so how do we do that? I mean, it's not exactly like flipping a switch.
Right. Right. It takes conscious effort, repetition. He talked about the power of visualization, of vividly imagining ourselves achieving our goals, of embodying those new beliefs as if they were already our reality.
Interesting. So it's like we're retraining our brains, creating new neural pathways based on these positive affirmations and visualizations.
Exactly. And Robbins argues that our brains don't always distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and a real one.
So if I'm constantly visualizing myself giving this amazing presentation, my brain is essentially practicing for the real thing.
In a way, yes. You're strengthening those neural pathways, making it more likely you'll actually perform well when the time comes.
That's pretty wild when you think about it. Our minds are powerful tools.
And like any tool, we need to learn how to use them effectively. That's a big part of what this book is all about.
So we've got decisions, we've got beliefs, but Robbins doesn't stop there. He also dives deep into the realm of emotions.
Emotions are a big one.
Right. And he challenges this idea that we're just puppets to our emotions, that we're at their mercy.
He says we can actually learn to control them.
Master our emotional states. That sounds, well, ambitious. How does he suggest we do that?
He calls it emotional mastery, and it starts with understanding that our emotions, even the negative ones, are actually signals.
Signals, like warning signs.
Exactly, like anger, fear, frustration. They're not inherently bad. They're trying to tell us something.
Okay, so instead of trying to suppress those emotions or pretend they don't exist, we should be listening to them, trying to decipher their message.
Precisely. They're often pointing us towards something that needs to change, either in our external environment or within ourselves.
So how do we actually go about deciphering those messages?
Well, he outlines this 6-step process for emotional mastery. And the first step is recognizing the emotion.
So naming it. Like, okay, right now I'm feeling stressed.
Exactly.
And then what?
Then we identify the pattern. Is there a recurring theme in these emotions? Are they triggered by specific people, places, or situations?
So we're looking for those common denominators,
Yes.
those things that consistently seem to push our buttons.
Right. And once we've identified the pattern, then we can start to shift how we're feeling. And this is where Robbins brings in the power of physiology. Our physical state can actually influence our emotional state and vice versa.
Okay, how so?
Well, he argues that by changing our posture, our breathing, even our facial expressions, we can actually disrupt those negative patterns and shift our emotional state.
So like, if you're feeling down, just slap a smile on your face and pretend to be happy.
It's a little more nuanced than that. It's not just about faking it. It's about consciously adopting the physiology of a desired state. Confidence, excitement, joy, and sometimes that can be enough to trick our nervous systems into following suit.
Huh. Interesting. So sometimes faking it till you make it actually works.
In a sense, yes. By consciously adopting the physiology of a desired state, confidence, excitement, joy, we can sometimes trick our nervous system into following suit.
This reminds me of that Amy Cuddy TED Talk, the one about power posing. Just standing in a posture of confidence, even if you don't feel confident, can actually change your body chemistry.
Absolutely. It's all about leveraging that mind-body connection to create the emotional state we need to achieve our goals.
So we've got decisions, beliefs, emotions. It's like Robbins is giving us this whole toolkit for self-transformation. What else is in there?
Well, he also digs into the importance of values and rules.
Values and rules.
Yeah, he calls values our personal compass. It's a whole chapter dedicated to understanding how our values hierarchy, the things that matter most to us, actually dictate our decisions and actions.
Okay, that makes sense. So if I value freedom and adventure, I'm probably going to make different choices than someone who values security and stability.
Exactly. And he shares this story about a woman named Lori. She achieved this major goal she'd been working towards, but she was still unhappy.
Why? What was going on?
Turns out her values of security and freedom were clashing. She wanted to travel the world, but she was also terrified of leaving her stable job and comfortable life behind.
It's like trying to drive with one foot on the gas and the other on the brake. You're not going to get very far.
Exactly. Robbins stresses aligning our actions with our values to find true congruence and fulfillment.
So how do we figure out what our core values actually are?
Robbins provides a list of common values, things like love, success, freedom, security, adventure, and he encourages us to rank them in order of importance to us.
So kind of like creating our own personal hierarchy of values.
Right. And once we're clear on our values, then we can start to examine the rules we've created around them.
Rules?
Yeah, these are the specific criteria we use to decide if our values are being met or not.
Okay, I'm not sure I follow. Can you give me an example?
Sure. Let's say one of your top values is love. But maybe you have this unconscious rule that says, in order to be loved, I have to be perfect.
Ouch. Yeah, that's not exactly a recipe for a healthy relationship.
Right. And Robbins argues that many of us have these unconscious rules, often from childhood, that make it near impossible to feel truly happy, loved, or successful.
So it's about recognizing those limiting rules and consciously rewriting them to support our values and goals.
Exactly. He even suggests finding role models, people who embody those values and rules we aspire to, and then modeling our own behavior after theirs.
It's like we're borrowing their blueprints for success.
Exactly. And Robbins stresses that it's not enough to just think about it. We have to act in alignment with our redefined values and rules.
He talks about the power of conditioning, of training our nervous systems to associate pleasure with these new empowering behaviors.
It's like we're training ourselves like we would train a dog.
So by consistently acting in alignment with our values and rewarding ourselves for those actions, we create these new neural pathways, making those positive emotions our new defaults.
Precisely.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of internal ground here. Decisions, beliefs, emotions, values, rules. But what about the external world? How do our past experiences play into who we become?
That's where Robbins dives into the concept of references.
References, like in a resume.
Not quite. He's talking about the sum of our experiences, both positive and negative, and how they shape our perceptions, our beliefs, and ultimately our choices.
So like our childhoods, our relationships, our successes and failures, they all become part of this internal library of references that we draw on to navigate the world.
Exactly. And he uses this fascinating comparison of Saddam Hussein and Oprah Winfrey.
Now, those are two very different life stories.
Right. But both faced incredible hardship in their youth. Yet their interpretations of those experiences, their responses, were drastically different, which led them on two very different paths.
It's a powerful reminder that our past doesn't dictate our future. It's all about how we choose to interpret those experiences.
It's about consciously choosing what information and experiences we let into our minds. He calls it the GI-GO principle, garbage in, garbage out. If we're constantly bombarded with negativity and limiting beliefs, our minds will fixate on that and recreate it.
It's like we become what we consume.
Exactly. So it's about being intentional with what media we consume, who we surround ourselves with, even the environments we choose to spend our time in.
Creating a world that supports our growth, not hinders it.
Precisely. And speaking of growth, Robbins doesn't shy away from the topic of money either.
Money. That's interesting. What's his take on financial success?
He dedicates a whole chapter to financial abundance, arguing that true wealth creation comes from adding value to the world, contributing beyond just our own needs.
So it's not about hoarding money, but about creating something of value that serves others and enriches their lives in some way.
Exactly. He challenges us to find ways to add 10 times the value to our work, relationships, or community. It's a powerful shift in perspective.
It's not what can I get, but what can I give?
Exactly. And he outlines this 5-step process for achieving what he calls financial mastery.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's hear it. What are the 5 steps?
Well, he starts with the basics. Step 1 is simple: earn more. But he's not just talking about getting a raise, it's about expanding our capacity to create and contribute.
Okay, so finding ways to add more value to our current work, developing new skills, maybe even creating multiple income streams.
Got it. So once you're earning more, what do you do with it?
That's where step 2 comes in. Managing that wealth. It's budgeting 101, really.
Yeah.
Saving habits, being mindful of spending, all that good stuff.
Building that solid financial foundation.
Exactly. And then step 3 is where it gets exciting. Mastering investing. He's a big fan of compound interest. Even calls it the 8th wonder of the world.
Yeah, I've heard that before. The idea of small, consistent investments over time snowballing into long-term wealth. It's like the tortoise and the hare of personal finance. Slow and steady wins the race. What's next?
Step 4 can get a bit more complex. It's all about protecting those assets.
Okay, so this is where we talk about things like legal structures, asset protection strategies, minimizing tax liability, all that. Exactly. It's about being proactive, especially as your wealth grows, seeking expert advice to safeguard those hard-earned assets.
Makes sense. So you're earning more, managing it well, investing it wisely, protecting it carefully. What's left?
That brings us to the most important step of all, enjoying that wealth.
Right, because what's the point of all this if you can't actually enjoy the fruits of your labor?
Exactly. Robbins reminds us that money is simply a tool. It's about using that tool to craft the experiences we desire, to support causes we care about, to live a life that's truly fulfilling.
It's about aligning our spending with our values.
Absolutely. And speaking of values, this whole idea of financial abundance ties back into that concept of contribution we were discussing earlier.
Right, how so?
Robbins argues that true meaning and fulfillment come from contributing to something larger than ourselves.
And he's not alone in that belief, right? I mean, that idea seems to be woven into the fabric of so many cultures and philosophies throughout history.
It does, doesn't it? It's like this fundamental human need to connect, to contribute, to make a difference.
He shares that powerful story about Mother Teresa.
Oh, right. Her life completely changed after that encounter with the dying woman on the streets of Calcutta.
Talk about a wake-up call, right?
It really makes you think about those moments in our own lives that shake us to our core, those experiences that force us to confront what truly matters.
And her response was incredible. I mean, to dedicate her entire life to serving the poorest of the poor.
It's a powerful example of what it means to align your actions with your values, even when it's difficult, even when it's uncomfortable.
It's about finding that thing, that purpose that makes you feel like you're a part of something bigger than yourself.
And Robbins argues that we all have that capacity within us to be heroes in our own right. Maybe not in some grand, world-changing way, but in those small, everyday acts of kindness and courage.
It's about those moments when we choose to stand up for what we believe in, even when it's hard, to lend a helping hand, to offer a word of encouragement, to make a difference in whatever way we can.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be this huge, dramatic gesture. It's about those small, consistent actions, those little ripples of kindness that we send out into the world.
Because those ripples, they have a way of creating a much larger wave of positive change.
They really do. And Robbins even acknowledges that this whole idea of contribution, of striving for something bigger than ourselves, it can be challenging, especially in a world that often seems so focused on the individual, on competition, on me first.
It's true. There's a lot of pressure to succeed, to accumulate wealth and status. And sometimes that pursuit can overshadow those deeper human needs for connection and contribution.
He talks about this tendency in society to tear down heroes, to magnify their flaws.
It's like we're almost afraid to acknowledge true greatness in others because it makes us confront our own perceived limitations.
But Robbins challenges us to rise above that cynicism, to embrace those feelings of awe and inspiration when we encounter individuals who are living extraordinary lives.
Because their stories can serve as a source of motivation for us to step into our own greatness.
Exactly. To realize that we are all capable of making a difference, that we all have something unique to offer the world.
Wow. This deep dive into Awaken the Giant Within has been incredible.
It has been a journey, hasn't it?
We've explored so much ground, from the power of our decisions to the importance of aligning our actions with our values.
We've talked about beliefs, emotions, even the role of money and the importance of contribution.
It's like Robbins has provided us with this incredible blueprint for living a more fulfilling and meaningful life.
He really has. And, one of the things that struck me most was his emphasis on the fact that this journey of personal growth, it's not a destination.
Right. It's not like you wake up one day and suddenly you're enlightened.
Exactly. It's an ongoing process of learning, evolving, and becoming the best versions of ourselves.
It's about embracing those challenges, those setbacks, those moments that push us outside our comfort zones, because that's where the real growth happens.
It is. And I think that's a really empowering message.
Absolutely. Well, before we wrap up, is there anything else from Awaken the Giant Within that you think our listeners should take away from this deep dive?
I think Robbins sums it up beautifully with this quote: "The only limit to our realization of tomorrow will be our doubts of today. Let us move forward with strong and active faith."
I love that. It's a powerful reminder that we are capable of achieving incredible things if we can just let go of those limiting beliefs and step into our full potential.
Exactly. And that's what I hope our listeners will take away from this deep dive: a renewed sense of possibility, a belief in their own abilities, and the inspiration to create lives that are truly extraordinary.
That's what it's all about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Awaken the Giant Within. See you next time for another adventure in personal growth.